as a very privileged white woman, like I grew up thinking I was outrageously lucky. And I was teased mercilessly. We now call it bullying. But I was the fat kid and teased mercilessly. And there was this interesting dichotomy of like, oh, I feel like the outsider, I feel like crap. But I went to a very privileged white, fairly diverse school, but was made aware because it was ethical culture, which makes you very aware of your privilege and aware of the world around you. And we learned ethics in first grade, and I felt very like, how dare I feel anything but lucky? That's pretty much how I grew up, and never really and felt a similar responsibility to make change for others, not for myself. So I think coming to a place where I was really looking at the statistics about women in the media took me a long time, because I had this how dare I mentality. And then I did become aware of the statistics, and a lot of it had to do with becoming a mother for me. Because what you said about if you see it, you can be it. I became the mother of a girl, of a daughter, and I wanted her to see certain things. And I then did some research, and Stacy Smith does some amazing research. The Geena Davis Institute does some amazing research. And what I found out is 77% of the people you see in all of media, which includes film, television, cartoons, everything, are 77% are male. So when you're looking at that as a human being, as a female human being, you feel like a massive minority, as I explained it to
which is ridiculous.
Yeah,
because
it's not. And as a male, you feel like you own the world. And that is something that we're seeing every day. There are so many parts of us that we're simply not aware of. And you were talking earlier about the sort of over-responsibility of the white male, and I really believe that to be true, because
they're in power.
They're in power, and B, I feel like there are so many systems in place that are habit. We all have our habits.
Yeah.
And some of them are good and some of them are bad. Hiring our friends is a big habit a lot of people have. Hiring people that look like you, that feel like you, that you're comfortable with, is just a truth that most of the world does.
I mean, I always make the joke that, like, Karen's my key demographic, right? Like, nice Jewish girls, from similar backgrounds. I mean, I totally was biased in my hiring of Karen, like, well.
I'm gonna talk about it for myself.
We all do it. We all do it.
I was at a screening of Equity. I did a Q&A, and this girl who looked just like one of the girls I grew up with, like, looked like an Upper West Side girl, came up to me and started talking to me. And her daughter goes to Bank Street, where my daughter goes to Bank Street. And like, all of a sudden, we're friends. And I don't know if that would have happened if it was a man. Like, probably not, first of all, because I'm married. And I only say that because if I was a man and a woman came up to me, like, that's not cool. So I'm not going to hire that woman or I'm not going to be friends with that woman, because what is my wife going to think? And these are the things, these unconscious biases, these stereotypes that we aren't aware of sometimes, that we have to make ourselves aware of. I'm very optimistic. I think I am by nature an optimist. And when you were talking about how we unconscious bias and that sort of lets people off the hook, I believe that we're good. I was at an event yesterday, and they were talking about Einstein had this core question, like, do you believe the world is good or not? Do you believe that we're all trying to make it better or not? And that really is a core question, because if you do believe in the good, like, then you act from the good. And I really believe in good. So I believe that we can only teach with love and compassion, you know, and empathy and compassion. And so yes, I believe we are changing for the good. I really do. I think it takes a lot of conversations like this and a lot of talking about the things that are really painful and uncomfortable and making art about it. And if that's, you know, I became an artist because I felt like that was the place where I could reach the most people with truths that they're sometimes afraid to talk about in other areas.
Have you seen people changed through shows like Orange is the New Black? Like, I know you've had lots of people come up to you and say things to you about it. So what anyone stand out? Like, what do you think has been the change that a show like Orange has made?
I think it's that thinnest line. It's
people relating to those women.
And feeling like that could be me.
Well, that's what the show does so well, right?
Yeah.
Is those stories of like, you know, that's Piper's story too, right?
And it's true. And how do we tell stories that create more compassion? How do we, you know, the first movie that I made as a producer was a short about grief and loss. I had lost my dad really suddenly to cancer. He was 55. And everyone, I felt like a pariah. Everyone was afraid to talk to me because they were so afraid to talk about death. And they didn't know how to talk about it, so they just wouldn't. And so I made this movie, and I worked with 10 grief counselors and social workers, and we created like basically some art therapy with all these sort of the different phases of grieving. And we created a discussion guide and a journal that went with it as a way to help people process. And I do believe deeply in this healing power of art, or I wouldn't be here. I think it's hard in moments like this, like in what's going on in the world, because you almost can't make the art fast enough to really make impact. So then I think for me, in a moment like this, especially as a white privileged woman, how do I make impact? That's the biggest question I sort of turn over to you in these moments. It's so much better and easier with kids because they're so much more open. When you guys have workshops on diversity, it feels a little forced sometimes. And I think with kids, it's, you know, at our school, we have, since first grade, she's had racial justice and advocacy classes in first grade. And my favorite part is they talk regularly about there are four different not kinds of people, they would hate me saying that. There are four different categories of human in any situation. So in any situation where there's a conflict, there's the mistake maker, the target, the bystander, and the ally. What I love about that breakdown is that the mistake maker and the bystander are almost neck and neck as mistake makers. That if you are a bystander, that's not okay. And I love that my daughter goes to a school that teaches it is not okay to be a bystander, that it is your job to be an ally. That is your job in life. And that's that unconscious bias. Like, how do we untrain ourselves, and how do we train our children? One of my favorite parts is that Jeffrey Tambor called himself out on it. And we have to, like, that takes a lot of balls. You're winning an award and you're like, dude, this is not okay. And I think creating art that talks about what you, like, I love Jill Soloway so much because she told her story. She didn't look for like the story that she thought would make the most money or whatever. She told the story that needed to be told in her heart and the story that she was afraid to tell. The story she was probably most afraid to tell, because as she's now put out, is like her family's story. And I think that's what we all have to do. She also said, you know, top of the patriarchy. I don't know how to do that. I've thought about it a lot. What I know how to do is make my art and make my own choices. When I made my movie, I said from the beginning, before we even hired the writer, I want to play a woman, married to a woman of color. Because if I'm making this movie, I want to create an extra role for a diverse woman, a woman from the LGBT community, and like basically, and a woman. So I hit those 3 checks. Now, I did hire an actual African-American woman. It was tricky. It's tricky then to go like, oh, is it okay for me to ask people, are you gay? That's actually discrimination. When I'm casting that role, I'm not allowed to ask that question. Just like I'm not allowed to ask their age, even though there's incredible racism and ageism and so many isms in Hollywood. So there's a lot of tricky navigating there.
Very quickly, we did a reading of it almost 10 years ago, and I felt when we did this reading that it spoke to things. The characters said things that I've always thought, but had been afraid to say, and I loved it so much. And at that time, they were considering it for the stage, and I just was like, oh my God, I want to do this. And then I got really busy, like, first of all, making an actual human being, but then also on Orange is the New Black and all these other shows. And 2 summers ago, we were on a ferry boat from Fire Island, and I only bring that up because it was from the town of Kismet, so it was actually Kismet. And we bumped into the writer, and she said, I just did a rewrite on the screenplay version of it. Would you like to read it? And we were both like, yes. And I felt more than ever it was these things that no one was talking about the relationship between work and art and commerce and parenthood and career and friendship. And, you know, I was talking to someone recently about how we're changing so much in reference to gender norms and how we talk about gender. And yet we haven't made those changes around parenthood and how we talk about the roles of parenthood. And we have such an antiquated version of what a mother and a father is. And it just hasn't caught up to our world today. And I wanted to bring up some of those issues. Our third partner on this, Michelle Gainless, who was the president of Comedy Central and who had left and was looking into producing her own stuff and who has now started a great production company as well. This was her first piece, off of Comedy Central. And the thing that I loved about Michelle from the get-go, or we loved about Michelle from the get-go, was that she was equally committed to hiring all women across the board. So we hired all female heads of every single department. So we have a female writer, a female director, a female cinematographer. And I love to talk about her because she had never shot a feature, not because she wasn't insanely talented, but because no one had given her the opportunity. And I saw a short she did in Africa with children and a leopard. And they say, like, the 2 things you should never do are work with animals and children. And she did this the film is spectacularely beautiful. But this was her first feature, and now she's shot like 3 more in the past 2 years. And
female sound design.
Yeah, female sound design.
Head of sound. Female set designer. Wardrobe. We had female camera.
Makeup. Yeah. Camera op.
Makeup,
Yeah.
Production
everything.
coordinator.
So editor. So we did all female heads of all departments and then 70% female crew. And that felt amazing. And yes, the women made as much, if not more, than the men. And it felt amazing. And one of the things that I love to say is there was way less drama than any other set I've ever been on. You know, if we like have that, the gender norms of like, women are dramatic and hissy fit, whatever, did not happen. There was no drama. We finished our days on time or early every day, and we were shooting sometimes like 8 pages a day.
Wow.
And it was an incredible experience, and I think my favorite part was the emails from women and young women who this was their first job on a set, and they wrote to us afterwards and said, like, I've been on a couple sets and it's not like egg. Even our production designer recently wrote us and she's like, I still haven't had another experience like egg. And they said, I haven't, like, other sets weren't like this, but you gave me hope and you made me feel like I can create that in the future. Like, when I'm the boss, I'm gonna do that and I'm gonna hire more women. And that's really why I'm sitting up here with this woman, is because way before I made this movie, way before I made movies, she inspired me, and the Geena Davis Institute inspired me about, if you can see it, you can be it, both on screen and off. And that is so deeply important. I'll never forget when I first heard the statistic of, when you watch anything, even a cartoon, 77% of the characters are male, which means any girl watching any media feels like she's a minority. Like, that's a ridiculous concept. Women are 50% of the population, but no matter what they're watching, when they're watching any screen, they feel like a minority. As an actor playing Tina, like, Tina has a lot more preconceived notions and judgment and her way of doing things than I do. Like, I think as a human being, one of my biggest goals is to sort of strip away as many biases as I can, because that makes me a more open artist and more able to play the widest variety. It also makes life more interesting. I'm just much more, I find life much more fun if you're really willing to listen and wonder. You know, our production company is called Too Wonderful to Be Limited, like two people full of wonder. And my biggest goal as I grow and age is to keep wondering. Like, I feel like people tend to get more and more narrow, and they hang on to their beliefs more and more as they age, whereas small humans, like, are much more like, I wonder, oh, I don't know. And I want to stay like that wonder place as long as possible. And I think Tina feels like she knows things a lot more than I do. But in reference to the dynamic of the set, it was very surprising, I think, to everyone. And I didn't realize what a white male I was married to until we were in this dynamic.
Oh, by the way, they're married.
He's a really, like, evolved feminist white male, but you put him in a room with a lot of powerful women, and he's still a white man, and he still can fall, like, we all as women can fall into seeing him as such, and he still can fall into those stereotypical roles, you know, like we all fall into our roles sometimes 100%. On and off camera without realizing it.
Yep.
Language is such an interesting thing, and as an artist, there are some writers, for example, who are very specific about language. You know, Aaron Sorkin doesn't want you to change a single word or period. And other writers are much more open. Risa, our writer in this, was somewhat open, but interestingly enough, our director didn't want us to change a word. She's like, she felt, and she's written and directed things, and in this case, she was just the director, and she felt that the writing was so precise that she didn't want us to change a thing, and she didn't want us to improv a lot. but she wanted it to feel like improv. So that moment that you just saw, even though I'm floundering for the words, that was all written as such.
Oopsies, yeah.
And language in our culture, I think we are in this moment where we don't have language for a lot of what's going on in the world, and we're creating new language.
Yep.
You know, when I was growing up, there was no such thing as gender fluid and non-binary, and we have a 10-year-old, and that is it just is for her, and that's such a beautiful, miraculous thing, because we as a culture are evolving. But this, as I said earlier, like the way we handle parent roles has not evolved. Like my daughter knows how to describe her gender fluidity so much better than we as a culture know how to describe parenthood. And that's, to me, a problem, you know, and part of what we were looking to delve into, and sometimes it's my deepest hope, why I'm an artist, is that we can express these things and delve into them in art as a way to bring up conversation to then move our society forward.